What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Thank you so much for giving us the most precious thing you have, your time, as we try to do what we always do, turn down the noise of the news cycle, talk about some things that actually matter, and get to the information we need to better discern the times we live in, because that's really what consuming the news is supposed to be all about, right? Although a lot of us fail at it. We're going to talk about that a couple different ways on this show. We got two different guests today. Justice Hudson, who is talking about the rise of the folk reporters. This is something I believe in. I think it's important, something I try to support, and we're going to talk to him. He is one. He's just somebody who goes to his city council meetings, covers the politics of his city. In the spare time that he has, he's going to talk about that, what it means, why it's important, and how it fits into having an all of the above media consumption that we should all be doing. Also, a favorite of the program, a favorite of y'all, because you keep telling me every time she comes on how much you enjoy her. Sarah Stook, our friend from over in the UK, is back talking another one of her pieces on presidential history. This time we're talking dead presidents. No, not the bank robbing movie. That was excellent, by the way. This is about how presidents died in office, not just the assassination, sometimes sickness, sometimes illness, and also how other presidents, because every president, believe it or not, like all the rest of us, they die. It has historical meaning and context we're going to talk about with Sarah Stook. Some great information you may not know. Love talking history. But first, we got to talk about a story that I don't want to talk about. I don't like covering it. I don't like writing about it. I don't like reading about it. I don't like discussing it. And I'll tell you why in just a second. Hunter Biden. Here's one reason I don't like this story. It's not because I don't think Hunter Biden has a lot of dirty laundry and now we know committed crimes, because he's agreed to a plea deal with him, which means he admits to them. There's no debating that he has committed crimes. There's no debating that he has a mess of a personal life. There's no debating his drug use. There's no debating his flaunting of the bad things he does. The reason I don't like the Hunter Biden story is not because Hunter Biden doesn't deserve probably criminal punishment, if not scorn for the way he's behaved himself despite being a child of immense privilege. I don't like it because every time we try to discuss something positive, there's always that person online. Well, what about Hunter Biden? If I submit any kind of criticism whatsoever towards anything on the right, whether it's Trump or Congress or anything, well, what about Hunter Biden? He has become this absolute talisman for some folks that will absolutely excuse any wrongdoing whatsoever by anybody else. By the way, the right's not alone in this. The left does this. Trump does not excuse anybody's behavior on the left. Hunter Biden does not excuse anybody's behavior on the right. Can we break this down really, really simply, real quick? I know this is a little condescending, but we have to teach to the lowest level here. Nothing Donald Trump did wrong is excused by anything that Hunter Biden did wrong, and vice versa. Nor does anything anybody else in the history have ever done wrong excuse anything Donald Trump ever did wrong, nor does it excuse anything Hunter Biden did wrong. Everybody got that? Do we need to put a graphic up on that? If you did something wrong, you're responsible for doing wrong. Doesn't matter if somebody else got away with it. Doesn't matter if somebody else did it before. If it's wrong, it's wrong. I hope these folks if they did wrong, got persecuted. And I don't care if it's Hunter Biden or Donald Trump or anybody else. Donald Trump, by the way, who's got already over 30 indictments pending and more. Well, what about Hunter Biden? No. What about Hillary? No. Nobody made Donald Trump break the law except Donald Trump. That was his decision. Does politics come into play on how this has been prosecuted? Yes. There is a two-tier justice system. Donald Trump and Hunter Biden are both in the upper tier. They are privileged. They get away with things nobody else gets away with. They get considerations nobody else gets away with. They get protection, and people have to tread lightly in investigating them because of who they are. But they're both doing wrong, and they both need to answer for it, both criminally and morally and in public opinion. But they won't, because there's going to be supporters on both sides that's going to use them as the whatabout to try to excuse something else. Let's go to Punchbowl News real quick. The latest example is an associate of Hunter Biden named Devin Archer, who, by the way, is a convicted felon for ripping off a Native American casino, but we'll get to that in a minute. I read Punchbowl News every morning. We'll link to it. Make sure you throw them a follow. Good information on what's going on in Congress. I will read from it from here. Quoting from Punchbowl News, there was something for everyone in the Devin Archer behind closed doors appearances at the House Oversight Committee on Monday. Both Republicans and Democrats alike seized. They're using seized here. I like when they pounce or seize, but it's fun too. Seized on portions of former Hunter Biden's associates' testimony to back up pre-existing claims about the Biden business family dealings. Here are our takeaways, and they go on to go through it. Let me repeat that. Republicans and Democrats alike seized on portions of the former Hunter Biden's associates' testimony to back up pre-existing claims. You can read this whole thing. It goes back and forth. Devin Archer's testimony confirms Joe Biden lied about X. But President Biden never discussed X, Y, and Z. Those calls were about mundane subjects, said one Democrat. Democrats also pointed out that Biden talked to Hunter all the time because he's his son. Biden says hello, but magically puts the phone down. Republicans say Mr. Archer explicitly stated the unaware of a $5 million payment that was alleged on the tip form. That's the 1023 we've talked about before. On and on and on it goes. Back and forth, back and forth. Can we go back to that first line because that's the most important thing? Everybody going into this meeting got out exactly what they wanted because they went in it looking for exactly what they wanted. We're not untilling new ground here. Important note at the bottom of this, quoting from Punchbowl again. Archer is a convicted felon. Archer and two others were convicted in June of 2018 for defrauding a Native American tribe out of $60 million worth of bond last year. He was sentenced to a year in prison and was required to pay more than $15 million in restitution. He has not done that prison sentence yet. In fact, the DOJ was trying to get him to go to prison before he testified here. This is a big mess. Everybody involved here is pretty much a bad faith actor and dirty hands involved. Hunter, who's now, because he took a plea deal, also a convicted criminal. Archer's a convicted criminal. And this Burisma stuff's a mess. Here's the long and the short of it. That still doesn't excuse anything Donald Trump did, who's going to probably be on the ballot in the spring with a whole bunch of indictments for his own wrongdoing. And Hunter Biden isn't going to be on the ballot in 2024. So, does President Biden have some complicity here? Probably. Is there some wrongdoing here? Sure. Joe Biden's a multimillionaire basically from being in Congress for the better part of 50 years and being vice president for 8 years and being president for 4 years. You're going to tell me there's no corruption in there anywhere? I'm not going to believe you. But if it looks like what happens in the GOP impeaches him over this, are they going to get a conviction and get him thrown out of office over this? No, not just because the GOP doesn't control the Senate and this is not going to happen, but because there's probably not enough evidence here. If they get the evidence, fine, I'll be in front of the line, but they don't have it yet. Hunter Biden sold influence to get to his dad. His dad probably head patted and went along with it far too much. If he did more than that and directly benefited, when the evidence comes out, not just people saying stuff, then you've got a case. But right now, Hunter Biden is a nice red shirt for folks to wave from the right at people on the left. And the people on the left are guilty of doing the same thing with Trump. Meanwhile, two people, Hunter Biden and Donald Trump, are proving out that the justice system has two tiers. They're both in the upper tier, the privileged tier. They're not in the tier where they get a bail bond hearing that puts them in the system and turns them into a career criminal. They got privilege. They're in the upper tier of that two-tier justice system. And you need to be able to step back and have a grown folk talk and say they're both benefiting from this system. They're both benefiting from all this, and it's a big ungodly mess. More Heard Tell right after this.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, we're going to talk about something really important that a lot of folks don't know about, but it's starting to grow. And I think it's going to be really important to how we do things like what I do, news media coverage called folk reporting. We got to get one and talk to him. Here be one, Justin Hudson. He's got the Hudson editorial on Substack. Going to talk about what that is from the great state of West Virginia, which y'all know I love. Justice, how are you, sir? Great to have you.
Good. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate your time. I wanted to start with the nomenclature. I know what it is because, you know, we talk in some of the same circles, have some of the same friends, but this idea of a folk reporter, look, on top of everything else I do, I also write for a local paper. I can write stories based off the notes of a county commission meeting or a city meeting, or when there's a board meeting of this or that or the other, or like what's going on in Fayette County where I cover sometimes. You got a crisis with the water company or the service district or whatever. I can do that from afar. There's value in going to these meetings. In the old days, the local paper or whatever would send somebody to do that. That's not the media environment we live in anymore. There's a vacuum there, and that's kind of where this folk reporter idea has come in to start filling that knowledge gap in local areas. Did I explain that well?
I think you explained it great. I think there's also great power in empowering just citizens to go out and interact with their government. You know, the meeting notes are great. But they can miss a lot of nuance that if you're not there on the ground, you're not going to experience. And so I think that you explained it perfectly. It's all about getting folks, if you will, out there on the ground, witnessing what government in their community is doing, and then getting that information out to the rest of their community, to the rest of the state.
Yeah, and the thing about this is, I'm all for journalism. I'm for good journalism. I think journalism is really important. You don't have to have a whole lot of special training to just go on your social media or whatever platform you have and go, this commissioner said this city councilman said this group showed up to take the podium to say this, that, or the other, this school board meeting went this way. That's just reporting what happened. You don't really need special training for that other than maybe getting somebody to edit you and check your grammar, right? That's kind of the beauty of this thing is like, anybody can go to these meetings. Anybody can put this information out there. We just need some people to actually do it.
Right. You know, and people take it so many different ways. There are people who go on Twitter and give out that retelling of events. And there's such great value in that. And I've taken it to where, you know, at the beginning I was writing articles. They were just write down the agenda in article form. And now I'm at the point where there's editorializing, trying to get more information into a smaller bit, just like a news reporter would do. So there is not any training that anybody needs. You do need the confidence to be able to just show up in these rooms where, you know, oftentimes you might, I'm kind of a bombastic personality, so I can go into these situations and be confident and not be kind of intimidated. but not everybody's like that. So, but ultimately, government's there to, serve the people. And so if you can kind of muster up a little bit of confidence, you can get out there. You don't need training. You don't need to go to school for it. It helps if you have somebody to read over it, but you can read over it yourself. And as you do it and as you go forward, at least in my experience, I've learned how to do things better, how to get better notes, and how to kind of get it quicker. And I've learned what to look out for when I'm editing to make those pieces a little bit more well-rounded.
Yeah, Justice Hudson joining us. Here's the thing I found when because I just came off the street. I didn't have any ends when I first started writing and doing media. I was really surprised how many people were really willing to help you and were really willing to kind of give you guidance, especially people that take pride in their craft, whether it's writing or media or journalism or whatever. I started writing. I had journalists start reaching out to me. It's like, hey, you need to do it this way. Were you surprised? And I know from your writing, you've had a lot of people do that with you. Once they found out that, oh, there's this folk reporter doing this, there is kind of an ecosystem of people that want you to succeed, that are good people, that'll be that advice for you. And they don't really charge you anything. They're happy to tell you those things. Did that surprise you? Because it surprised me when I first started doing this stuff.
Oh, it was amazing. There are lots of journalists in the state who I respect so highly. I read their work. I interact with them online. And one of the biggest reasons why I started writing were things like West Virginia Public Broadcasting for the work that they do. I was really inspired by those audio stories. So when I did this, I was a little bit nervous that, well, for one, that nobody would see it. And that two, if people did see it, that they would kind of, there would be a problem, that there would be, it's a weird world in media. You're rubbing shoulders with people who've gone to school for it, who've worked in it for a decade or more. And so I kind of was a little nervous. And then, man, when I put stories out there and I would hear from, people from down in Charleston, people from across the state, and they would say, keep it up. Let me know if you need any advice. This is how I've done it in the past. It was really amazing because there's no other reason that they would do that other than, like you said, they love their craft, but also that they see somebody doing something, they want to help them out. And that just shows good people. I mean, that's what West Virginians are about anyways. But it's good to have it confirmed again in this new line of work that I'm doing.
Justice Hudson joining us. There's something, we both grew up in West Virginia. For folks that don't know, for all the problems in West Virginia, I've told people West Virginia's always had really, really good media, punches way above its weight. It's been excellent. Lots of award-winning stuff. The Gazette has had a Pulitzer Prize in recent history. I've done radio hits for West Virginia Radio Corporation. You go in the building down at 58 CHS, and it's like, Peabody, Murrow, the whole wall's full. West Virginia's always had great media, but that's been endangered in the last few years. One of the reasons I started writing a local column again for just specific for West Virginia issues is there's a lapse, and there's some malicious to some people, but a lot of it's just economics. Everything's nationalized. Local media is struggling. Everything's on the national narrative. When you're covering somewhere like Wheeling, West Virginia, where you cover, which is, kind of almost a textbook small city, right? Like if you just looked at the picture, you go, oh, it's small city America, very picturesque, an important city in the grand scheme in West Virginia stuff. There's a media gap for markets like Wheeling. And then that's where this folk reporting comes back in again. It's not really a new thing. It's just a new spin filling in a gap of something that we should have been doing all along, isn't it?
Definitely. And, I got to give credit to the media that is in town. We've got a couple TV stations. We've got our newspaper. And their coverage, it's not that there's necessarily anything wrong with it, but I would say probably the biggest consistency when you talk about that with people, when you talk about these legacy or established media, is that they lack nuance, or they lack kind of a bigger picture, or a fuller reporting, or, I've heard all sorts of things. And so they'll send people to events and they'll write things about it. But especially, with our TV stations, they're bite-sized articles that are a couple paragraphs, and people have their opinions about the newspaper too for a political spin. So something that I've been surprised about too is that when I put my work out about local government meetings, I will get people that are elected officials that work for the city, my friends, random people who just happen to read my stuff, and they'll say, "It's really amazing what you're doing. It's better than this media station. It's better than that media." Now, I don't really necessarily like to put it on that comparison. I don't like to say X is better than Y or whatever. But I think it does say something about a gap in media. People want to read about their community. People want to learn about the nitty-gritty issues that are happening in their government. While they might be small issues to other people. I mean, when Wheeling City Council is in, June of 2023, spending or allocating the last bit of their ARPA money, that's a big story. That's an important story. People want to understand where that money went. People want to understand where the rest of it might be going. They want to hear why their counselors are defending what they're going to allocate it for. And that's important. And that's not necessarily a story you're going to hear unless you are going to buy a paper, which more and more, sadly, people are not buying papers. So there is a gap. We've got, like you said, great media in the state. We've got people at these organizations, in spite sometimes of whoever owns these stations or these papers, that we've got people there that really care, that want to be out there. But there's still always been in this community across the state, I see it online too, that there is like a contempt. People hold a lot of mixed feelings about media, and they want more, and they want more broad stories. So there's a gap. I like to think I'm filling it. Sadly, because it's a part-time job, I can't fill it all, but one story at a time.
Right. Justice Hudson joining us. That's the key, though, is the thing. And I've been doing some mentoring with younger folks that are looking to get into media. So I tell regular people, though, is like, well, wait a minute. If you have a Facebook, you have a platform. If you have a Twitter account or X or whatever we're going to call it next month, you have a platform. If you have any kind of social media and you have people that are friends and family following, you have a platform. So you can talk to them about these events. I want to, something that you touched on in your piece, you wrote a piece in Hudson Editorial about your 50th story that you've posted. We're going to link to his Substack, by the way. All his content is free. You can donate if you want to, but it's free content. We're going to link to it, and we're also recommending it off our Substack, herdtell.substack.com. His is the Hudson Editorial. .com. You mentioned it here. I think this is an important piece because you talked about your journey in doing this of, well, maybe this ain't for me. Maybe I shouldn't be at a meeting. And I know you talked about being a little bombastic in your personality, and you even had doubts. But you said this, you said, looking back on it, the self-absorbed thing was to not get involved and to not do it because you had the capability to do it and the time to do it. What would you tell people? Look, again, we're not saying you should quit your job and go do folk reporting because let's be honest, there's not a lot of money in it. Can you take one day a week to write about your school system? Can you take an hour a week to write about a local issue? Hico, where I went to church growing up, they're still waiting on decent running water. So I always harp on it every couple months, and everybody's like, why are you talking about that? And I'm like, well, because if you live there and you get sludge water out of your faucet, it's a big deal. Those kind of little things, those are an hour, 2 hours, a couple minutes out of your week. But that's an important piece of the local small level of journalism that just about anybody can really do. And I found it interesting that you put it that way, that, the self-absorbed thing is to not share that platform that you have, no matter how small it may be.
Yeah. And, that comment came because this Folk Reporters program is an initiative by Black by God. And I love Black by God, and they do great work. But when I first learned about that program, I thought, oh, well, I'm white, so it's not for me. And now I laugh about it because it's a funny notion. There was it was a self-absorbed, like I put in the article, it was an attitude that I had that this is not for me. For one, because it's not a paper. I didn't want to step on people's toes at the organization, but at a certain point, it just came down to the fact that if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? Like you said, it's not a huge time commitment. I got to admit, like when you're attending a meeting here in the city of Wheeling, that's about an hour for a government meeting. Sometimes they're 2 hours. I went to a school board meeting a couple weeks ago that was 2.5 hours because of executive session. That's a lot of free time to spend. And then if you're coming home and you're writing those things up, that could take you another hour, hour and a half, depending on the amount of fact checking you have to do. So, yeah, I mean, if you've got a platform, and like you say, with social media, everybody has a platform. I think it behooves me to say, why would you not want to share these things out? It's hard to put your neck out there. It's hard. It's scary. But once you do it, you'll get a lot of reward out of it. There are so many untold stories that, to the point where, I start doing little write-ups about the city government, and I'll even branch out to some community stories. I'll get people in my community saying, you should write about this. You should look into that. You should talk to this person for a story. And it doesn't always go somewhere. I mean, this is beyond part-time. Like you said, there's not much money in it, especially for a folk reporter, even if you were a paid reporter. But at the same time, there's something really rewarding about typing up a city council or going to the Human Rights Commission here in town, typing up something about it, hitting post. A couple days later, somebody in my circle or somebody in my community says, wow, I wouldn't have known about the mural projects that the Arts and Cultural Commission are approving. It looks really cool. Really excited to see that. Thanks for writing about it. It's little stuff like that that makes it worth it, that makes you want to keep going. There are definitely parts that make you want to stop because government can sometimes be frustrating. The people that you work with, like I say, sometimes you're rubbing shoulders with people who have a real sense of, don't mess with me. This is my craft. And it can be intimidating, but maybe not for everybody. If you just go, you show up, you put your head down, maybe you keep your head up, you take your notes, you ask your questions, you'll be amazed how much not only you'll learn, you'll be amazed at the feedback you'll get. And ultimately, you're going to be teaching a lot of people around you, which is important. People got to feel connected to their government. People got to feel connected to their community. That's how I think we improve as a nation, is if we don't let, all politics is local. So if you start focusing on the local, if you start getting the word out from what's going on in your small community, I think it's going to make your life better. It might make your friends' lives better. You might get more creative with maybe how you talk to your politicians. It's really not that scary once you do it. So I would encourage anyone and everybody to do it. Take a couple hours out of your week, attend a meeting, get some eyes on it, and then go from there.
Folks, if you've listened to the Heard Tell program, you've heard our friend Gabriella Hoffman, but you need to make sure you're checking out her podcast, District of Conservation. It's a podcast exploring the nuances of true conservation efforts from DC and beyond. From topic discussions to exclusive interviews with conservation and energy newsmakers, Gabriella keeps listeners appraised of the latest news stories while elevating important voices. Listen to District of Conservation on Apple Podcast or wherever podcasts are played. Folks, you've heard of Ethan Brown on the Heard Tell show a couple of different times, but if you're interested in learning about how to discuss things like climate change without all the politics and doom and gloom, head over to his podcast, The Sweaty Penguin.
Sweaty Penguin is a late-night comedy-style climate podcast working to add nuance, critical thinking, humor, and hope to the climate conversation. They got over 100 episodes already, breaking down weekly news stories and specific topics, from the vanilla to the ADHD to the international accountability to orangutans. Yes, I know, it's a comedy thing, so just go with it. But each time, exploring different ways we can make progress on these issues while still helping the economy, health, security, and everything else we care about. Feel overwhelmed, exhausted, or excluded by today's climate change discourse? This is the podcast for you. Find the Sweaty Penguin wherever you get your podcasts or at www.thesweatypenguin.com.
Yeah, and there's a ton of resources out there. You talked about Black by God runs a whole folk reporter. I know Pointer, which is one of the journalism things, they have tons of just free resources on here's how you research, here's how you do this, here's how you do this. And a lot of that stuff's free. So again, if you want to do this stuff, reach out to us. We're happy to talk to you about it. Justice Hudson, one last thing before we let you go, I wanted to point out, you've done a couple of things, and you just touched on this. It's local news, but sometimes local news branches out. You did a great little audio thing with people who had chosen to come to West Virginia. You did those interviews. You talk about, discovering a buried rail car that needs cleaned up, just old diesel fuel and grease and various things. And then every now and then something national happens, like Secretary Pete Buttigieg shows up in town, and you can put a little bit of a local flavor on that. Whereas, somebody that's not local might write a blurb. They don't understand why he walked down that particular street and that sort of thing. Just kind of nutshell of what you've been doing at Hudson Editorial, folks that can follow you. And also so people that want to maybe start doing this in the future can look at it and see examples like, oh, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, it's funny you say that too, because when after Pete Buttigieg came, I went online and, there's a whole media circus where people come to town, and then the opposite side of the political spectrum, I think it's probably a lot of bots saying, well, it doesn't even look like people are working downtown. This was a staged trip. And it's funny because it's like, if you live in Wheeling, you know that work is going on. They have torn up every street in downtown. It is like, some would call it a war zone. I don't think I'd go that far. I think that's a bit whatever. Anyways, at the Hudson Editorial, I've really been spending the last 6 months attending local meetings, but also going to community events, trying to think, I follow my local media. And so I try to think, what is something that they're not talking about? Is there somebody that they're not speaking to, or is there an event that they're not covering that I can? And even if they are covering it, there are so many times I show up somewhere and WTRF7's a camera person there, to the point where I have one of their reporters, I've got her number. Every time I see her, I give her a smile, because I see her almost at every single thing I decide to go to and cover, from small dog festivals that happen in town all the way up to the ribbon cuttings for police headquarters. She's everywhere, and I love it. So even when there are other media showing up, I think it's still important to add your own nuance. Everyone's got their skill. Everyone's got their knack to writing. Once you start it, you'll find it. So I really encourage people to do that. I encourage people, if government meetings are your thing, and I think government meetings are very attainable. There's only 1 or 2 a month for around the state. That's about how it goes. Very, very part-time. Typically in the evenings, which makes it a little easier too. But if that's not your thing, why don't you think about what else is going on in my community that needs covered? It can be something like, my neighbors have dirty water, or the hillside slipped, or coal mines opening back up, coal mines closing. Or it could be something small, like local organization puts on community food drive. It could be something uplifting. News doesn't always have to be, and I think this has been my biggest lesson. News does not always need to be hyper partisan. It does not always need to be extremely negative or worrying. Now, obviously, because we know this through Facebook, negativity wins. If you put something negative on someone's screen, they're clicking on it. But news in the past, There used to be entire sections just for positive news. So if that's your thing, do it. If your thing is holding people to power, do it. Spend a couple hours. That's what I do. I spend a couple hours, I write it. You can publish it on Substack for free. You can just put out a PDF file if you want to. I would say probably go with something like Substack or Medium to do it. Or you could just tweet out a thread. A lot of people do that nowadays. They sit in the meeting. As it's getting told, they're tweeting out a thread. So it's not much work. It's mostly a lot of mental work to get yourself to that point to where you feel confident. You kind of, you're not scared that you're going to mess up. And if you do mess up, you're able to fix it. People are willing to help you out along the way. I really encourage people to just get out there, do it, get your eyes on things, and give it a shot.
Yeah, best way to say it. Justin Hudson joining us. Let folks know where they can find the Hudson editorial. Let them know what you've got coming up. You got a couple projects we're going to highlight in the show notes on our Substack, the celebrating 50 stories that you've done already. Tell folks what you're going to be doing for the next 50 and tell them where they can find you both on social media and the Substack until we get you back on Heard Tell again, my friend.
Awesome. So you can go to thehudsoneditorial.com. It'll take you straight to the Substack. You can find me on Twitter, which is Justice Hudson 97. Twitter for now, X tomorrow. If it's still open after that, I post there too. Looking forward to the next 50 posts. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to continue doing my government posts. I've got a project about a local art studio, which opened up an art gallery for the month called Clientele as a PSYOP, which features a lot of cryptids and conspiracy theory themed art. That was really cool. And I'm going to speak to LGBTQ West Virginians and kind of get their find out what their pulse is like, their ear on the ground, see what's going on in the community, and how they feel about the current climate. I've got some exciting articles coming up, not only the government reporting, but as things go out throughout the year, I'll be writing little special features. So it's worth a look. Like we said, it's free. You can subscribe and pay if you want to, but everything that I make is free because I really think that people should, if they want to read it, they should be able to read it. So the Hudson House or the HudsonEditorial.com, check it out.
Hudson Housewares will be a spinoff. We'll get to that later. That's when you get your merch line going, right?
That's when I get my business. That's when I get my farm. That's when I get everything.
There you go. Big dreams in a small town. That's free. You can go ahead and write that up. I'll just give you that one. Justice Hudson, thank you so much for the time today, sir. We'll be reading along. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, she's one of our favorites. We have her all the time. We talk history with her. We talk culture stuff with her. She'd rather talk about fashion, but we don't do that here because Eye of the Cargo Shorts would just offend her and her English sensibilities. She's also one of them loyalists to the crown, but we'll forgive her that. Sarah Stook's back on the program. How are you, ma'am?
I'm good, thank you. Proud to be British. Long live the king.
Yeah, you got a king now. You didn't have a king last time I talked to you. You were just starting to get one when we last spoke.
I miss the queen, but he's doing all right.
And don't we all? She writes at electionsdaily.com and a couple other places, UK Mallard, some other folks. She does good work. You've been doing these things. You always do these lists about presidents, and I love them. You did the dead presidents list. I actually want to start with the last one you did. It's a two-part series. It's elections-daily.com. We're going to link to it. Notes will be in the Substack. Make sure you check out the full pieces and all her other great work. The last presidential funeral we had was George H.W. Bush. I was actually at this one. I took my two youngest kids. We went to the rotunda. We stood in line. We were in line about maybe 5.5 hours. It was really cold. But you weaved through the visitor center. We started actually in front. They had the queue in front of the Supreme Court by about 6 rows deep, snaking through. Took about 5.5 hours, got in, got up through the rotunda, actually, walked through the rotunda. It was an amazing experience. I had my two younger kids with me. They were younger at the time. I highly recommend that experience to everybody, whatever your politics or whatever, being in line, talking to people all over the country. That was an amazing experience, the state funeral for George H.W. Bush. It was also kind of, for a lot of folks, symbolic, kind of the last president of the World War II era and that generation. There was a lot of symbolism in that. I was in D.C. for the funeral. It was a massive funeral. They had the city shut down. These things are big, big deals. We haven't had a lot of them. We've had, recent memory, we've had Ford and Reagan and Bush. Carter is, of course, on hospice, so he'll probably be next. God forbid something happens to somebody else. These are big deals when they happen, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the most recent one is 2018, which is a pretty long time ago. And, obviously, say Jimmy Carter is in hospice and he's nearly 99. So, you can imagine it. Whereas here, our prime ministers are younger. There's nobody older than 80 odd. So, roughly we've probably got, hopefully a while to go. But yeah, last one was Bush. And I think because, it depends on the president. Some presidents have had really tiny funerals. Then you've had probably people like George Washington where everything was shut down. I think it depends on the president, especially if it's sudden. I mean, they had to plan Kennedy's funeral within a couple of days.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because you've done other lists about assassinated presidents that have died in office, everything from Kennedy getting shot to just, good old-fashioned pneumonia. We've had presidents die in office. It's something that's one of those things that, even though historically we know it can happen, we talk about, the vice president's one heartbeat away from the presidency. You never expect it, whether it's a living, it's one of those gradual but sudden things, ain't it? You just don't expect these presidents to die, but they're all going to die. And they tend to kind of die in groups. And especially lately, we have older men being presidents. So we're probably going to have a couple more of these in the near future, one way or the other. We just don't think about it that way, though, do we? But historically, this is kind of common.
Presidents, on average, actually live longer. If you look at people quite a few have made it over 90. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Reagan, Ford, Carter, Bush. Quite a few have actually lasted quite a long time. But yeah, the ones who have died in office, one Harry Harrison was 61, which is fairly old for the time, but he was also stupid enough to walk around DC without a coat, so that's, here nor there. Zachary Taylor was fairly young, healthy because of the water. Lincoln was shot. Garfield was shot. McKinley shot. Hoover was in his 50s. Very sudden. FDR was very poorly, but he'd been president for forever. And Kennedy was young, and then one day, bam, boom, headshot. It's all very sudden, but when you've got someone like Biden who's over 80, I mean, God forbid something happens, but if it did, it wouldn't be as much of a surprise because he is an older gentleman.
Yeah, we have Biden who's over 80 already. Trump's pushing 80. You would assume, unless they live well into their 90s, which, God bless them if they both do, fine by me, we're going to have more funerals. Let's talk about some of the surprising ones, though, because there's an underlying thing here, too. And you talked about this in other columns that you've wrote that we can look at. We've had presidents that have been in very, very poor health. Wilson was incapacitated by a stroke for a wide swath of his presidency. JFK may not have lived through his presidency. They really hid how bad his health was. Eisenhower had a heart attack. We've had other presidents. FDR, of course, died in office, had all kinds of health problems. We've had a lot of presidents with health problems, but those were always hidden. They were always covered up or excused away. The modern age, you can't really get away with that. When Trump had to go for COVID, that was heavily covered. When Biden has any kind of a fall or a slip or a moment, we saw the viral video of Mitch McConnell, the Senate minority leader, the Senate minority leader, where he has that frozen moment and he's had, health issues and stroke. We see these older people in public office. It's a different age now where you can't hide that stuff. Maybe we should be talking about this more.
I did write a piece about this last year called America the Ancient, about how old, a lot of your politicians are. And I did a list of who was over 80 in Congress and sort of comparisons. Joe Biden is older than Dan Quayle. Trump was born a month before Bill Clinton presidency, very separated. Rishi Sunak is younger than all but one of Biden's kids. It's such a massive age gap. I mean, there are reasons behind, younger people want to enter politics, older people will vote for people their age. People like Nancy Pelosi probably have a lot of time and funding behind them. But, it's worrying. Dianne Feinstein as well. I know she had trouble recently. There's questions about her health. And it brings up the idea of term limits as well. I know Nikki Haley's a strong advocate for that. And I'm sure quite a few other politicians are. Whether that will ever be implemented, I don't know. But, they're like my grandparents' age. I can't imagine my grandparents in Congress or even the White House, and I'm sure many people with grandparents or even parents the same age would think the same way.
Yeah, Sarah Stook joining us. It's interesting, if we have Trump and Biden again, and this was true the last time they faced off in 2020, their combined age would reach back to the Civil War. That's how old they are combined.
It's just staggering how close they are to. I mean, Biden's closer nearly to Lincoln's assassination, his birth, than to now. And it's truly astounding. I mean, it's like having, Thomas Jefferson was 83 when he died. Can you imagine him still being president at 83? It's mad.
Yeah, Sarah Stook joining us. What's one or two presidential deaths when you sat down and did this list that kind of struck out to you? Maybe ones that maybe a presidency or a president that folks just don't talk about, or maybe a famous one that they're just not aware of how they died. Which ones kind of stuck out to you?
Well, I think, you always remember the assassinations and the deaths in office, but quite a few sort of died quite quietly. Nixon and Ford both died. And Nixon was a really interesting one because he was, castigated for Watergate and he was a pariah for years, but then he sort of came back as an elder statesman and had a very respectable funeral with lots of mourners, which is, fascinating because you think, oh, everyone probably hated him. But he sort of, historically people still attack him, but there are people who are usually lower down on the list of worst presidents. James Buchanan's usually absolute bottom, and he didn't, bug his enemy's HQ. So yeah, he's the one that sort of, he died quietly, and not to make you feel old, I wasn't even alive when he died.
The timeline on some of these are interesting. One thing you pointed out, you think about Lyndon Johnson and Harry Truman being kind of different eras of presidents, but they died a month apart. So you have, when you look through these histories, you have little nuggets like this that are really, Reagan died really close to Ford. There was kind of this cluster of them because Reagan was sequestered for the last 10 years of his life because of the Alzheimer's and things like that. It's interesting, the little tidbits and nuggets that you find in these stories like this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, LBJ was very unhealthy, so no doubt contributed to an early death. He had heart attacks, he smoked, he ate rubbish, so, things like that. Then you have someone like James Monroe, who was the biggest hypochondriac, and he was about 85 when he died. So, it's pretty amazing how we were always worried about his health and all sickly, but he made it to 85, which, back in the early 1800s is a very good age.
And then presidents who had reputations for being rather clean living. Of course, Lyndon B. Johnson was a very profane, hard-charging man, so it probably didn't really shock people that he had a third heart attack and died. But you have guys like Calvin Coolidge and Warren Harding who had a reputation that was pretty solid, but they both died very young, 57 and 60 respectively.
Theodore Roosevelt was 60 and he was, outdoorsy man. He said because he got really ill when they were charting the Amazon, and he said it's taken a good decade off my life, and he was probably right in that respect. But, Coolidge died suddenly, had a thrombosis, embolism, same with Roosevelt. So, yeah, some just sort of, but of course there are health conditions. Harding had a heart condition that nobody knew about. These things happen. You just don't know. And obviously going even further than that, there's still questions about people's health because you can't really, you can't know, especially when it's older illnesses that you don't really have anymore, like diphtheria or typhoid, which, obviously still happen, but not in the Western world. So it's less understood.
Yeah, Sarah Stook joining us. Okay, historically, outside of the assassinations and those things, probably the most famous one, since it involves the founding fathers, is probably Jefferson and Adams. It's such a cool story. It's been told a million times, but it's just fascinating that they died. And the story, you tell the story, because everybody learns it in school, of course, but it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, this can't have been accidental, right?
It's fascinating. They had sort of a symmetry, they weren't too far apart in age, and like they were frenemies, like their politics were different. They would eventually would attack each other, but at the same time, the Adamses looked after Jefferson's daughter while they were both all in Paris, and that's her death is what caused Abigail to send a letter to Jefferson. And they sort of, over the decades, Adams tend to send more than Jefferson. Were sort of not top, but Jefferson's last words were allegedly, "Is it the fourth?" But it was probably something else. "Is it the fourth?" It was near his last words, but it sounds a bit better as last words, doesn't it? And obviously, Adams died later in the day, not knowing Jefferson had died, and said, "Oh, Thomas Jefferson survives," then pegged it. And it was July the 4th, 1826, 50 years after the Declaration of Independence, which is like almost the perfect day. It's so, you couldn't write it. If that was in a film, you think, oh, that wouldn't happen. But yeah, it's kind of amazing. And they both lived very long lives, which, people like George Washington didn't live that long, and people after them. So they were sort of, well, John Adams was the first to make 90. It would be a very long time before anybody would.
Yeah. And then you have people like Andrew Jackson who lived long enough to be photographed. So it's really interesting how history is both further away and closer than we ever think it is, isn't it? Sarah Stook joining us. I promised I would ask you this when I got you back on, but I have to explain to your British sensibility because you don't have bison in the UK. Just because it's friend shaped doesn't mean it's friend. Leave the fluffy murder cows alone. But I promised I would let you talk about the fluffy murder cows and the bison and tourists who will not leave the bison alone.
I mean, I have a thing where I like to breathe and live. So, I wouldn't go and hop a fence and try and cuddle a bison. But they are so cute. It's like you see these wild animals like snow leopards and tigers, and you think, if they weren't going to kill me, you would want to cuddle them so much. It's like a giant version of my cat. And it's probably friendly because my cat doesn't like me very much.
They are big, they are noisy, they do a lot of grunting and other noises that we won't talk about on a family-friendly program. They're extremely hairy, so they're very dirty, they smell bad, they have very small brains, they're very large, they're very fast, and they're very cranky. You need to just leave them alone. We call them fluffy murder cows for a reason.
Yeah, but it's very, let's be fair, it's a very American thing. People go and pet wild animals that they shouldn't. It's like the most American thing ever. Let's be realistic here.
The most American thing ever is we have a tourist industry that's based on charging people to fly here and get in dangerous situations with animals. That's pretty American. We like that. So that works out good. Sarah Stook's back with us. Real quick before we let you go, we talked about Harding for just a minute, but you're actually going to be writing a little bit more about Warren G. Harding. You find him interesting.
Well, by the time this goes out, hopefully it will be on the 2nd of August, which is the 100th anniversary of Harding's death. So I've written a piece about him. Hopefully it should be out on that day, sort of chronicling his life, his politics, his relationship with his wife, his illegitimate child mistresses, his presidency, his death, and then the legacy, which has actually changed quite a bit. People actually are more sympathetic to him. At first everyone was really sad he died. He was very popular. Then stuff about Teapot Dome and his illegitimate child came out. But now sort of historians are sort of softer about him in a way. They say, he wasn't the absolute worst, but, he did some good things. He helped the economy. He was very anti-racist, which when you're after Woodrow Wilson is a miracle because that dude was very racist.
Yeah, people, if you haven't been familiar with one of the big keys to the racial strife in America is Woodrow Wilson's presidency. You really need to read up on it, especially how he treated Black veterans coming back from World War I, something I personally take great offense to, but you need to read up on all that stuff. Sarah Stook, always enjoyed talking history with you, my friend. Let folks know where they can read you, follow you. We're going to link to everything we just talked about. Let folks know how they can keep up with you till we get you back on Her Tell again.
Well, Elections Daily, I'm doing a weekly sort of diary of Nikki Haley's presidential campaign. I know that others are doing ones for people like Ron DeSantis and Trump, so also make sure you read theirs. Mallard, I'm doing about consorts of England and Great Britain. which is always fun because I like doing about historical.
That's a British term. You got to explain what the consort is because...
Well, it's like the first lady, but for the king or the queen, because obviously we've had queens, which you've never had a female leader, though.
Well, we're working on it.
3 elected, even though 1 lasted like a week.
Sir Stook, love having you, my friend. Good talking. We'll have you back again soon.
All right, great. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am. And that'll do it for this edition of Heard Tell. Wherever you are, you can join us through whatever medium you're listening to. If you're on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, we're even on some podcasts over in India. You folks in India, we see you on the stats. Welcome. Thank you. Drop us a line. We're all over the world and on any podcasting platform you can think of. Make sure you're subscribing and or following or whatever that platform calls it. That helps us keep track of you, lets us know how you're listening to the program. Make sure we can tailor it to get it to you. Heard Tell Show or my name, Andrew Donaldson, on any of those platforms. It'll come right up. But we have a one-stop shop for everything that we do. Heardtell.substack.com. It's completely free. Subscribe. You get everything right into your inbox. Anytime I write, do a media appearance, do a new episode of Heard Tell. We also have Heard Tell specials. We're going to get back to doing the twice on Sunday recap shows. We also have a huge archive, so we're going to have some specials, some best of, things like that, and also some of the food writing from Yonder and Home. We're starting to re-up that as well. We got over 600 episodes of Heard Tell in the archive to start porting over. We're going to be working on that. So sign up for the Substack. Please get you right in your inbox. Never miss anything. Doesn't cost you anything more than a click. Heardtell.substack.com. We sure appreciate it. And follow us on social media. Heard Tell Show on the Twitter. 4 for the Fire is my personal Twitter handle. No, we're not going to call it X, but if you could share us and let folks know that our programs are worth checking out, we sure would appreciate it. So wherever you are, across the street or around the world, we hope you're well. We hope you are well fed. We'll talk to you real soon for the next Heard Tell. All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la máquina.
Folks, if you've listened to the Heard Tell program, you've heard our friend Gabriella Hoffman, but you need to make sure you're checking out her podcast, District of Conservation. It's a podcast exploring the nuances of true conservation efforts from DC and beyond. From topic discussions to exclusive interviews with conservation and energy newsmakers, Gabriella keeps listeners appraised of the latest news stories while elevating important voices. Listen to District of Conservation on Apple Podcasts or wherever podcasts are played.
Religion is at the intersection of our 21st century life, even if we don't express a faith. At a time when it seems that religion isn't as prevalent as it once was, it still leaves its mark everywhere. As a pastor, I know that religion isn't something I just do on a Sunday, but it's found in every nook and cranny of my life. Sexuality, politics, social media, the economy, war, nationalism, all have some kind of religious angle to them. And as a communicator, I want to find the stories that can help people understand this part of our society that is so important to so many. Hi, I'm Dennis Sanders, and I'm the host of Church and Main. Church and Main is a podcast about the journey of faith and where it intersects with modern life. I look at faith with a journalist's eye, asking the who, where, what, why, and how religion affects some of the major issues of the day. Join me as we journey together. You can listen to Church and Main podcast at the website churchandmain.org or on your favorite podcast app. I look forward to seeing you.